Hello and welcome to our first episode of Minerva PLM TV. I'm Jennifer Moore, your host, and today I have with me a very special guest. So that's really amazing, Diana. You've obviously naturally worked your way around to PLM, with starting out as a designer and whatnot. But tell me a little bit more about what it means to lead communications and training teams in a technology project.
Well, OCM is usually brought in with new technology and new processes.
Mm-hmm.
So we really want to manage the change to the business. So communicating how those changes are going to impact the business to the end users is really key.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And when you say OCM, you're talking about really organizational change management. And what does that really mean, particularly when putting it into a PLM context?
So Minerva has a structured approach to OCM,
mm-hmm.
and it comes down to about 5 main categories. We usually start out with a stakeholder management strategy, understanding who's going to be impacted. And then we go into project governance and strategy. What's going to be the scope of the project?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to implement it? And what is the strategy on decision making? Then we go into communication. Now that we've understood our audience, we need to communicate during the entire project. And then we have learning and acceptance. So we need to learn how to use that new technology and accept that that's our new way of doing our job. And then there's sustain and maintenance. So that comes after go live. What are we going to do about that? Are we going, we could talk about that a little bit more later.
Okay. So that's a great, high level overview of the different components of organizational change management. How do you know that you need it, or why do we need OCM? Are there results that a company can expect by including OCM principles in their PLM projects?
Well, whether you know it or not, I'm sure you could probably Google it, but the number one reason that technology implementations fail is the lack of OCM.
Wow.
If you don't have OCM, if you're not communicating to your end users that this change is coming to prepare them,
mm-hmm.
they're not going to feel involved. A lot of times you're going to drive this change by implementing this new technology to maybe increase revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's going to be a faster turnaround or response time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to get your engineers out of chasing data and back into innovating.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never met an engineer yet in almost 20 years that has said to me, my favorite part of my job is the data management, not the creation.
Right.
So obviously that makes a lot of sense, Dan, and it's something that I hear often whenever companies have failed with PLM in the past. There was a lot of focus maybe on out-of-the-box features, but not necessarily a true understanding of the change impact or how to measure acceptance and make sure that people are on board. And,
exactly. So OCM really brings structure and communication to the technology to get people involved and understanding the impact and when it's going to happen, and it allows the business to be better prepared.
Mm-hmm. So when you first are, looking at the original element of stakeholder management, how do you break that down into manageable pieces so that it doesn't become, a huge project in and of itself just to do each piece of the organizational change management?
Exactly. So we really want to understand who's involved. We really need to understand, is it going to be just our employees?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people forget management's really involved, or maybe management forgets the smaller users. So we really need to investigate across the company and maybe suppliers. Do you want them to be coming into your system?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to understand who's impacted. And everyone's impacted differently. So we need to break those people down into groups, because management's going to want a different type of communication. End users are going to need a different type of training. We need to identify who's going to be on this team, who's going to help implementation, who's going to do the testing, who's going to be developing. So stakeholder management is more than just who's going to be affected. It's going to be who's developing the training, who's delivering the training, who's going to be making the decisions about your department. Because remember, we're not just talking about engineering often. We're talking about quality, purchasing, manufacturing. So we really need to look across who's going to be our representative of those different disciplines and participate in different ways. Now, all those people have other jobs. So how much time can they spend on this new project?
And
so that's stakeholder management.
That's interesting. We have two buzzwords. One is globalization.
Yes.
It goes down. And the other is digitalization and digitization. And that ramps up because everybody is working based on digitalization, video conference, streaming. Yeah? We do a lot of things. But we talk with our grandmother in the home for elder people. So they even grandmother is using WhatsApp with the video stream. So digitalization becomes public. That is one advantage. I think it's the only advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And now this next book that you're writing, is it going to be on PLM or a more advanced topic, a next generation?
It's based on the idea, next generation, and we call it system lifecycle management. The reason is, I think when the story is, the history is strange. We started with PDM, or even before with engineering database, and PDM comes product data management. I think PDM was focused on engineering, on design. It was more or less the administration of CAD documents, mostly mechanical CAD documents, to store the bill of material, to send the bill of material to the MRP ERP system, and to make a partition of the engineering change management process. And then overnight, it was interesting, overnight the American PDM supplier changed their name in PLM, from PDM to PLM. It was maybe inside 1 week. Everybody has to follow. Nothing happened. The company was the same, the system was the same, but the promise was, yes, we save the product life cycle and we are strong. And I think it has not. It was a promise. It was a vision. I like the vision, but the vision was not executed. So I think the focus has increased against PDM. But what we have seen the last 10 years, so IoT, iOS, all the discussion about digitalization, service-oriented business models, digital thread, the international standards of sustainability and traceability. So many things came in, and we need a total different approach of the old PLM focus. And that was the reason we called it system lifecycle management. We extend the focus to the very early phase, the requirement management, the system architecture, and we extend the focus to the end, to the service and maintenance and repair operation, for example, based on the digital twin. So that because we mostly administrate not only products, but systems, mechatronical or cyber physical or cybertronical system, we call it system lifecycle management. But the background behind it is, it's called system lifecycle management. And then was a subtitle, and that was the digitalization of the engineering.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So it's really the next evolution of what we've seen over the past 40 years, from PDM to PLM and now to system lifecycle management.
Can we avoid the term revolution? Because in Germany, no revolution was successful since many years. So we call it an evolution. So the Germans are very careful with revolution. A revolution, everybody is afraid he has to learn something different, new. His work has no value. So I call it's an evolution. So to be more carefully.
Absolutely.
And to get the acceptance.
So if we take a step back and look at kind of the history that you've witnessed and been part of and helped shape and mold, what would you say are the typical steps from PDM to PLM before we even start to get to SLM?
Yeah, I think I'm an engineer, and typically I try to speak graphically. And when you think about a coordinate system with 3 axes, then you can position exactly what a PDM and PLM system and system lifecycle management should be. I think the one axis is the product lifecycle. It starts with the market analysis, the requirement management, requirement engineering. Then we have a phase, I think, for mechatronical and cybertronical products. It's very important. The system modeling, that's the system architecture combined with the requirements. Then we start with a typical engineering design, mechanical design, electrical, electronic design, software design. Then we have different phases of simulation. We have simulation in early phases, for example, MATLAB Simulink. We have simulation in later phases, for example, noise, vibration, harshness, or finite element analysis. Then we have a critical phase. Normally there's a gap between engineering work and manufacturing work. So we have the barrier between the engineering bill of material and the manufacturing bill of material. And then we went over to the manufacturing planning process. So what we call process planning. Process execution is typically solved by an MRP ERP system. And then at the end, we have the operational phase. That is typical the operation in the sense of business-oriented, in service-oriented business models. That's, for example, update on air, predictive maintenance, and all this stuff. So the one axis is the product life cycle. The other axis going vertical is are the so-called domains or disciplines. So we have mechanic, we have electronic, we have software, and I added a fourth discipline, that is service design.
Absolutely.
When we design a service-oriented business model, we have to integrate the service function just from the beginning of even from the system architecture. So the second axis is the disciplines, and the third axis is the value chain. I think we have different operational units in one company. We have supplier, we have service provider, we have first tier, second tier, and whatever. So product life cycle, disciplines or domains, and value chain. And then you can position a PLM system. The old traditional PLM system in the 80s and the 90s is typically positioned in one phase, the design, bill of material, CAD documents, and typically in the discipline orientation of mechanic. Maybe a little bit electric, maybe some electronic. But at that time, nobody takes care about software.
Right.
When we are flying an Airbus or a Boeing, so we have to know that the software is stored in Excel or somewhere, not in the central PLM system. And that makes me nervous.
Yeah.
And typically we have a very rough transfer from the supplier to the OEM. So I think we are not successful in integrating the product lifecycle, the disciplines, and the value chain.
You actually wrote a paper not too long ago titled, "Why is PLM so hard?"
Yes, yes.
And of course, my first question from that is really, why is it?
Yeah, so there's a number of factors that go on. I mean, the first one, kind of going back from the history point of view of these data management solutions, currently the early data management solutions that have become PDM, which are kind of the core of PLM, came from engineers and developed by engineers. And in kind of the habit of engineers is over-engineering as well, is trying to make perfect solutions to do every kind of known situation possible. And as a result of over-engineering, they can become more complex.
Absolutely.
And because they're defined by engineers for engineers, that's great for engineers, but a lot of the users today of lifecycle management solutions are well beyond engineering, and so they're more difficult for them to use. They haven't been engineered for their use. And kind of the third reason is that we tend to try to implement these solutions, and maybe it's a habit that we have from an IT perspective, not just a PLM perspective, but to implement technologies in the way we do things today. Without taking advantage of changing the way we do things in a better way, in a more innovative way, or allowing the technology to support things that we could not do in a paper world, but we can do in an electronic world. So again, they're more difficult than they should be because we've tried to automate things in a way that wasn't natural for automation, for example. So those are kind of the three major areas that I would say is kind of the history of it, and the fact that it was made for engineers by engineers, and then over-engineering that as a result of that, and then our need to really think differently has not been encouraged at times, and we've really tried to implement the old way of working, but in new technology, which again has made it more difficult.
Certainly. So two of those points that you just mentioned, the first being we often over-engineer PLM, and the second being that we're implementing a process as it is today, whatever that process may be enabled by, whether it's other systems or paper-based or whatever. Can you expand a little bit on these 2 points and why that's really an issue I mean, I understand it makes it a little bit more difficult for the users to be able to use it, but whenever you're thinking about, PLM and the many different parts of an organization and business processes and products and all of these things that it touches, isn't there a bit of over engineering that's obvious?
Well, I think you first have to kind of step back from it, and you look at PLM as, some data likes to say it's a strategic business approach.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really look at it from an enterprise view, life cycle management, product life cycle management, so concept through end of life or through life, depending on if it's a circular economy or not.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to really enable the life cycle, that means getting the right products to the market in the right way at the right time. I mean, it's a holistic end-to-end view. So it's a life cycle way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to go engineer that, I have to look at the big picture, because if I don't look at the big picture, I'm going to sub-optimize. I mean, it's almost a natural thing of doing it. So again, the systems that were historically built for engineering, optimized for engineering because that's what they were used. But now lifecycle management is not an engineering discipline; it's a lifecycle discipline, which means it's an enterprise discipline. So without that enterprise view, that end-to-end connectivity and optimization, you're going to sub-optimize, and that's really kind of the issue that most people run into. And the reason why they run into it is, one, they don't have the ability to see it from a lifecycle perspective because there's no ownership.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a problem with the way organizations are run, the way we educate, management and non-management as well. I mean, I did an article recently with someone interview, and he ended up describing the article, and the title was PLM has a lot to do with something to the effect, a lot to do with the Roman Empire. And his point was, and my point was, is that the way we manage our businesses are based on a division of labor for the most part, right? It's a pyramid.
Right.
And a division of labor where we structure, operations over here, engineering over here, manufacturing operations, but marketing, and we have these silos. And that's all, understandable from a division of labor point of view. And also there's disciplines you go underneath engineering, you have optics and you have electronics, and you have mechanics and so on. But in the world, that's fine if you deal with these things as separate entities. But if I'm really trying to optimize and get the most return on investment, I have to optimize from an end-to-end perspective. But that means I have to have ownership. But if my management is, I only care about operations, or I only care about engineering or whatever, and I don't have either visibility or measurements, or if someone's not measured to go do something or not paid to go do it, they're not going to go do it unless they just happen to be nice people. But we don't have that luxury in most organizations. We have to do what we're paid to do.
So for me, digital transformation is, everybody wants to take the tagline digital transformation equals PLM, especially if you're in the PLM sphere, from the PLM world.
Yep.
But everybody else does that too, whether you're in design and engineering, or whether you're from logistics or enterprise asset management. So everybody wants to focus around their area and put the tagline digital transformation on it. For me and most of the clients that I advise, what we see is, of course, it cuts across all. There is not one system that conquers them all. There needs to be information flowing between the different platforms. And there needs to be interoperability between different departments in a company, obviously, but also between the software tools, so that you can harvest all the knowledge from engineering, for instance, use that both in manufacturing, but also ultimately out in the field for operations and maintenance, if it's a facility, but even harvesting knowledge from products if you're into new service offerings with the Internet of Things, or with harvesting data from sensors. So for me, digital transformation is a natural evolution, but in order to make that happen, something needs to be done with interoperability. So how information flows, and that it can be translated at least between the different departments in a company, and also between the software tools. But the software tools are not going to run this. The businesses, in my view, run this. Yes. Because they have the needs. But I've seen several clients that have huge PLM projects, very nicely defined engineering-wise globally. And then, for instance, the ERP integration just sends over a flat list of an engineering bill of material. So all of the data from engineering actually gets lost in translation. And a lot of the metadata isn't even there. So, of course, a lot of that information would be very beneficial for manufacturing to know about, even procurement and logistics to know about.
Absolutely.
But it just stays in the PLM platform. And that's, in my view, what it's about, to make the knowledge available across the company, across the different departments and the different groups.
And of course, at Chimera, you guys have a pretty big focus on sustainability. It's all over the website. Has PLM helped you with your unique goals in that area?
That's a good question. And I think it's a bit maybe even the other way around, that I think because of our sustainability focus and large portion of our investors are having that high on their agenda to look at corporate responsibility and sustainability, that made it easier for us to understand and justify that. Why do we need to do this right? And I think it's been actually helping us to go through that PLM journey, because the sustainability focus has helped us in that. But I guess it's the other way around as well. So neither one goes sort of alone.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that collaborative relationship between the two elements, and that's really great to hear. It's a great mission for the company too. Now, of course, one of the things that some people may be familiar with is that you did present at one of the PI PLMX conferences, and you talk a lot about keeping the momentum with a PLM journey. And one slide really kind of struck me right from the get-go, and that was this idea of PLM is all about mindset change in the organization. Tell me a little bit about that.
I could probably talk about that for a day, but I'll try to keep it short. I think it all starts with the fact that PLM processes as business processes are typically very diverse, in the sense that they touch different parts of the organizations. They go all the way through the different parts of the company, but they are never on the on the surface, but they sort of are beneath the day-to-day transactional operational activities. And it's maybe not that well seen that why it's so crucial, but in the end, it's actually enabling a lot of the processes on the surface then to perform better. And that kind of leads to the fact that unless people understand why are we doing it, you won't succeed very well. And on the other side, in the PLM process, it's all about streamlining the end-to-end for the product. Information flows, approvals, changes. And once you're optimizing the end-to-end, it's never about everybody winning. Mm-hmm. There will be teams who have more work to do, who are not going to be happy. And there are teams who are maybe more happier because it's easier for them. But keeping the whole organization aligned, it's about the common decision that we need this is why we need it, and this is the way forward, how we go it together. And it's especially important for the management to understand that how do they need to lead their parts of the organization, as it's not everybody wins in that kind of a harmonized, aligned framework. And I think that's the essence why we ended up with this conclusion that it's really all about the mindset in the organization, that we've decided that this is good for us because it helps us in the overall goals, and we understand that it's not always easy, but we still stick to it because of that reason, what we've identified.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much, Susanna, for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you. And to all of our viewers, if you enjoyed this content, please remember to hit the like and subscribe button so you'll be alerted the next time we release new content. Have a question that you'd like to see addressed here? Drop your comments below or send me an email at jmo@minerva-plm.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.